let's get started. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. For those that I haven't met or you don't know me, I'm Nigel Biswas-Baldwin, co-founder of Fraction, and have the pleasure of hosting today's very exciting session, the latest webinar from Fraction. What we've been trying to do in these webinars, we've been running a few weeks now, is really address some really key and big issues that are happening biopharma. We've addressed anything from artificial intelligence right the way through to clinical outcomes assessments. So a huge range of webinars so far, and we'll move quickly on to today's with Tom Gawlick. Just wanted to remind everybody that we are recording this presentation, and we'll maybe use it for future marketing purposes. If you can't accommodate that, then I'd have to ask you politely to dial off. But otherwise, let's get cracking with today's very exciting webinar. As I say, will be presented by Tom Gawlick, entitled "The Winds of Change: Considering the New Economies of the US Pharmaceutical Market." And I have to say that in getting sort of custom feedback around the webinars, this was one key item that people wanted to hear more around. So thank you for Tom for volunteering your expertise around this very critical area right now. I'll let you introduce yourself, Tom, of course, but just to say, I've enjoyed working the last few days, getting to know you a little bit more and really recognising your deep expertise in this area, but also your imagination of how things may evolve in the years to come. And I know you're keen to share that with the audience today. So without further ado, we'll leave questions to the end, possibly over to you, Tom.
Okay. Well, thank you. Good to see everyone. And I'm getting a chance to meet a handful of you and have enjoyed these. So looking forward to continuing that. So yeah, the winds of change, new economies of the US pharmaceutical market. There's a lot going on. I think the fingerlings of these changes are pretty broad, and looking forward to walking through this. I do want to caveat away a few things before I get started. My background is commercially, so I will come at my thinking largely from a P&L perspective. I think about implications on top line, gross to net, expenses, profitability. So it may not be as directive in some of the areas that you all work, but certainly trying to touch on this broadly. And I think the market access and the payer landscape in the US is evolving. I do not at all consider myself an expert, dangerous enough to be able to tackle some of the high level issues, but there's a lot going on right now. And certainly some of this is fact, and I will throw in some speculation as well. So all those caveats aside, let's hop in. So I know you'll get all of this at some point, so I'm not going to read bullet by bullet here, just to capture the U.S. pharmaceutical market today. A couple of thoughts. The global market is about 1.5 trillion US dollars, and today the U.S. market, or last year, made up about 567 billion, expected to grow up to 903 billion. That'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of naysayers with all of these changes on what this really means. Obviously, the aging population, the development of R&D, we all, I think, share those on either side of the pond. I will add one other thing that has changed a lot here is the growing demand for specialty drugs to treat rare diseases and conditions. This brings added costs to the landscape. There are more complicated distribution networks. Specialty drugs right now account for about 40% of all the outpatient prescriptions. And when I say specialty, technically the government defines specialty here as greater than $600 a month. So it's not specialty in the complications of how it's distributed. It's specialty in the context of price. And I think with the changes in Medicare, I think Medicare is largely seen as a positive for the industry. But it is, on the verge of creating a very powerful purchaser that I think will be something to monitor kind of moving forward. And with that goes the negative pressures on prices and all those kinds of things. And I will just say, I think there is clearly a public perception that pharmaceutical pricing in the US has gotten too high. Interestingly enough, The pharmaceutical price in the US, I think, makes up about 8%, 9% of the overall healthcare costs. So smaller than many markets. This was a survey that was done early this year with pharmaceutical executives and challenges that they were facing. Inflation was number one, drug pricing and reimbursement second. And I think we're seeing the manifestation into actions of this as it relates to cost cutting, as it relates to pricing and reimbursement, as it relates to reassessments of portfolios. So these were things top of mind, and I think we're seeing a lot of actions kind of going to place right now, and certainly changes in how they are strategically looking at portfolios. So the topic here is kind of winds of change, and I think it's kind of appropriate. There's a lot going on. I'm going to try to just touch on some things that were top of my mind. So starting with pricing pressure, which also ties into the Inflation Reduction Act. I believe it was Stelios who touched on the IRA this summer. I'm going to dig a little deeper into that. Again, the fingers go pretty deep and broad on this. I'll try to keep it high level, but it's creating a lot of new considerations for pharma. I'm seeing a fair amount of job cuts. We can talk about that. One-stop shop consulting, I think, related to vertical integration, which is a challenge, but yet an opportunity for us. And I'll comment on patient financial support, just some of the changes. I know some of this may be unique to the US market. But anyhow, these are the topics I hope to kind of tackle today. So I guess I was thinking of commercialization questions that are likely being asked today. And certainly I would be thinking about, I think, which assets have the highest potential for revenue? What is the fastest and most efficient way to get through clinical trials and deliver outcomes that bring attributes to the marketplace that can allow a product to be successful? How will products be paid? What is the market access strategy? What are the barriers the drugs are going to face? And can we enhance that profile from a cost effectiveness perspective? And I think touching on those, it speaks to a lot of the different functional areas. I will say, though, if I had to drill into one of those questions that would keep me up at night, it's just understanding, can you get a product developed and at the end of the day get it paid for in today's world? And I think really the million-dollar question that companies are beginning to ask. So apologies to those of you who are comfortable with the US market and the payer system. I didn't know. I thought it'd be worth maybe just a quick payer landscape 101, just to give a little context. So if this is all no new news here, apologies to everyone, but we have three major payers in the US. There are more, but we have three major payers. So I would start on the commercial side. The commercial side is private insurance. If you work for an employer in the US, good chance you have group health insurance. That's private insurance. It makes up about 60% of the lives today. So it's the largest insurance category, and it makes up about, roughly, I think about 30% or so of the healthcare expenditures. The next segment is Medicaid. Medicaid is a joint federal and state program. It's an income-based program. So it's funded federally as well. It's run by the states, but you have to qualify based on a lower income. About 20% of the lives make up the Medicaid population. And as you can see, about 20% of the expenditures. And then the third bucket is the Medicare. This is a federal health insurance program for anyone over the age of 65. And it also includes coverage for those less than 65 if you qualify on certain disabilities. Again, about 20% of the population falls into this bucket, and about 20 or so percent of healthcare expenditures. It's got several components. I'll just comment on two because they'll be referenced downstream here. It's Part B Medicare, which covers in-office administration. If you go to an oncologist and you get an in-office administration there or something like that, it all falls under a Part B benefit. And Part D is the drug benefit that covers prescription medicines at an outpatient. And the strategies there are a little different, but those are two main components. And I'm focusing on Medicare a bit because I think that's where I'll spend most of my time in discussion today. And I think it's largely because of the population shift and moving from employment to Medicare and the aging population. This is a segment that's expected to grow considerably in the US. So I think it's one that the companies are paying a lot of attention to. I'm not going to go through the top chronic conditions and top costly drugs. You can see those, you'll have this. But as you can imagine, this is affecting a higher age population, right? So you see the higher costs going to diabetes and hypertension and cholesterol and cancer, Alzheimer's, some of those kinds of things. So with that, I want to come back to the Inflation Reduction Act and why it was mentioned in one of the previous presentations this year. I think it's worth just digging a little bit deeper. So I think there's three main components I'm thinking about. There are a lot more in this plan, but the government's going to be able to negotiate prices for certain drugs. And that is, the process has started, although it doesn't take effect until 2016. It's going to require drug companies to pay Medicare if they raise prices at a greater rate than the consumer price index. So that is taking place now. And I think what's interesting, it's going to cap out-of-pocket spending for people in the Part D population. And it's changing the whole benefit design that has real implications for manufacturers. And I'll touch on that in just a minute. There are other things, access to insulin at lower cost, access to vaccines. There's a lot in here, but those are the three main takeaways for me. And I thought maybe where I would just touch on those. So let's start with the drug negotiation program. This is going to be a program for direct negotiation between pharma and Medicare on high costly drugs. This will start in 26 with 10 drugs, and every year they are incrementally adding drugs into this population. I mean, it's really a little unclear how this negotiation process has worked. One thing that's interesting is they're going to index ceiling prices here to how long products have been on a market. And I think there could be some downstream implications here. So, you know, for small molecule brands, you had to have been on the market here for 9 years. If you're a biologic, it's 13 years. But I think the average life of a small molecule brand from launch to generic penetration is about 13 or 14 years. So the government can step in at year 9 now and say, we're going to negotiate a new price with you. And that out year window, as you can imagine, is where the profitability comes with a company as they have products on the market. So that one will be interesting to kind of watch. I guess as I think about it, from pharma considerations, I think it's going to be important as you get in, I think, to these pricing negotiations. What's the value, and do you have evidence? I mean, it could be health economic, it could be additional clinical, but how do you position yourself to be effective in the value that product is providing? I think it's going to be important to have a strong value proposition. And I think this is going to bring a much earlier strategic planning consideration commercially. If you think about bringing a product into a market where there's a product that's on the drug negotiation program, you're going to have to think about that from a pricing. You're going to have to think about, am I going to compete with that? Am I going to get into that bidding war? Am I not? I think it's going to bring a whole set of new planning considerations much earlier in the process. So that's where I'm getting to a bit of my speculation. So that may be right or wrong, but that's my take. So inflationary rebate penalties. This is another one I'll just quickly touch on. You know, interestingly enough, Medicare has had no authority to manage price increases in the pharmaceutical industry. This act now is going to give them the opportunity for single source drugs in Part D and Part B to penalize, if you will, or collect rebates for any pricing actions above the consumer price and consumer price index. So to me, I think this is going to take some very thoughtful launch price planning, really careful analysis here. and I don't want to get too deep into this. I'll reference average sales price, average manufacturer price. The ASP is the price that's used for reimbursement in Medicare Part B. It's just simply total revenue divided by your units, and the average manufacturer price is the price used in Medicaid. That really is the price the companies sell to the wholesale manufacturers. So, sometimes you'll hear wholesale acquisition costs, you'll hear average wholesale costs, but in the government, they use these two pricing standards. And so it's going to be really important, I think, to have a segment strategy that really allows you to manage those prices. So I think that's going to be really important. I will just make a fully transparent and editorial comment here. If I look back, I think I would say I use this. This is a little bit of, I think this industry in the US killed the goose that laid the golden egg. It was unmanaged, it was vetted, it was wide open, there were no pricing issues. I can't tell you how many times when I was in portfolio lead roles where the knock on the door came, the CEO said, I need $15 million more out of you this quarter. Well, there aren't a lot of levers to drive revenue like that without pricing. And I think that just became a lever they got pulled in this industry. And so anyhow, I think this one, we're already seeing price increases coming down, but this will be one that certainly will need to be managed too. The third component, I just wanted to quickly walk through Medicare Part D, prescription drugs, the standard benefit, because I think it'll give you a sense of the cost implications that are going to be facing pharma here. So let's just take the 2023 design today. There are 4 contributors to paying for a prescription right now in Medicare. The patient pays a portion, the manufacturer pays a portion, the Part D plan pays a portion, and then Medicare as a provider pays a portion. So today, right now, a patient, the first row, they pay a deductible that's up to about $500. That's all the patient's responsibility. We then have a phase that takes us up to about $4,600 that they call it initial coverage. Those costs are then split between the patient and the health plan. And then you go into a bucket that has historically been called the donut hole. It takes you up to about $7,400 in that window. The patient pays 25%. The manufacturer has paid about 70%, and the Part D plan 5%. Anything over $7,400 fell into what they called a catastrophic category. And at that point, Medicare largely picked up the bill for all of those drugs. And if you think about a 65, 70-year-old person who might be on multiple drugs, it's not hard to get to $7,400. It's not per drug. It is an accumulation of the costs of all your drugs. So that's the market today. So the redesign component that I think is interesting, and I'm picking 2025 for kind of the marker here. There are some changes subtly in 24, but I went out to 25, and you will see there are 3 components of payment levels. So the first one is the deductible. The patient is still paying that. So that hasn't changed. But what has changed is they are capping the patient out-of-pocket cost at $2,000. So in this population, the patient will never pay more than $2,000. And getting to that point, it's split a little bit from the payer and the manufacturer. But the big change is once that patient hits $2,000, all the financial liability goes to the manufacturer, and maybe more importantly, the health plan. And they're picking up the magnitude of the costs anytime a patient has hit that $2,000 cap. So I think the real effect out of this is the payers are reacting and saying, no, we're going to come back to the manufacturers and we want more rebates for your drugs to have access. So there's 2 components here that affect the P&L statement and the gross to net. You've just got the rebates that you would have to pay to the government based on any program you would offer here. But now I think you're seeing a much greater impact of rebates that go back to the health plans. So this design change, I think, is having a major impact on profitability. So as I think about potential market implications here, and again, I won't read these word for word, I think there's going to be a greater impact on small molecule versus large molecule or biologics. I think that, that earlier pricing window, I just think going into markets that may be more crowded, I think that's going to create challenges. There's clearly going to be policy changes that are going to affect performance. Payers are coming after more utilization controls and more rebates. Manufacturers are clearly going to see a reduction in profitability. And who knows, again, speculatively a bit, but this lowered revenue could lead to changes in innovation and R&D. Just to add on indications, there could be some challenges to companies who think about life cycle and how I add on new indications here. Generic competition could change. A couple of interesting things, today that, generics look at markets that they're going to go into in the US, and they have been offered like 180-day exclusivity period. So they come in, and in that window, they keep the price pretty high, right? Very close to the branded price. They get 180 days to make their profit. If 3 or 4 or 5 generic companies come into the market, that price can get down to 10% of the branded price very, very quickly. The other thing that is happening is some of the generic strategies that the pharmaceutical companies use were authorized generics, meaning we'll sell you our branded drug, call it an authorized generic, and you can sell it as an offshoot generic in the marketplace. And that has been a strategy that has been pretty widely used, and that's going to change because now they're going to count the cost you sell your authorized generic to a generic house as part of your average selling price. So that's got a pretty big implication here, I think, in terms. So I think the other thing here is there's just a lot of spillover. I think the commercial plans are looking at this and looking at cost-saving opportunities, and I think they're beginning to say, well, how can we share a little bit in this? And so I think collectively, how is US pharma going to respond to this? Again, a little bit of speculation here. I think more and more they're going to be looking for large markets, orphan markets where price can be supported. I think they're going to have to prioritize early stage development. They're going to think much more of segment strategies and which market are we going to go into. I've mentioned, I think a lot of people believe there will be a shift away from small molecules over time and expansion into biologics and gene therapies. Certainly some of that is already taking place. I do think it'll be important for pharma to be innovative from an R&D and emerging technologies and cost-efficient tools. We had a presentation on AI, and that may fit in here as well. Generating new effectiveness information. Pharma's going to have to be able to manage complex routes to reimbursement. I think we're seeing more cross-company collaboration, and we're going to have to be able to understand the implications for in-office administration. If you're selling a drug in the Part B space that's administered by physicians, I think physicians with lower ASP pricing that's going to lower the basis for their reimbursements, they're going to be looking at this closely. Can they continue to distribute? Are they going to go to a drug that's not under a price negotiation? Are they going to push this out to an infusion center? So I think lots of things to kind of manage there. And I would just leave it a little bit with a glass half full, half empty. These are a couple of speculative thoughts on everything related to the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. And one is pretty modest. It says, on the left, there could be some slowdown in development, but really a modest reduction in the number of new products, maybe 1% or so. Forbes has been quoted saying, the provisions here are significant, and they could see, a significant decrease in revenues throughout 2039 and much fewer drug launches. So I think the reality is everyone is seeing change. I am certainly seeing shifts in portfolios. I'm seeing reassessments of pricing. I'm seeing cost containment measures. So I think we're going to learn a lot here over the next year or two and ultimately where this goes. I just leave for you on the Inflation Reduction Act that there's a company out there. They're called the Hayden Consulting Group. They're based in the US. I just provide a link here. I used them when I was in the brand seat. They did a lot of my payer analytics, and they have some nice stuff out here on the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of white papers. So if you'd like to just get a little deeper backdrop into this, you can go out to that website, and they've got some good stuff out there. So, okay. So quickly, last couple things. I think, I don't know, I'm assuming you may be seeing some of this on your end. We're seeing some changes in staffing here in the US. Some of the reports suggesting that many companies are considering the layoffs and furloughs, and certainly there's other options that are taking place. We're seeing outsourcing of some functions, and this is affecting all functions. It's not just a sales or commercial implication. I think it's affecting many of them. And this is really driven by a lot of factors, but I think pressure on pricing, inflation, rising interest rates, access to capital, all those kinds of things. So I do think the reality is that department budgets are going to be reduced. And that has a negative impact for us. But if we flip that a bit, it's an opportunity for us as well in the fraction model and other real partner models, because I do think if there are lower staffs and challenges, I think experienced and capable people who can deal with executive level organizations, I think that will continue to be a need. So it's a downside, but I think it's an upside for us as well. I'll also comment quickly on vertical integration. I've been doing my consulting role for about 4 years now, and I've seen, I think, some significant changes in that 4 years in the US. Just giving example, I didn't provide names here. I'd used a launch planning vendor for years. That company now has expanded into broad strategic support. They've added a market access team. There was another strategic vendor that I spent a fair amount of time with. They are fully into launch planning, launch commercialization, pricing strategy, market access reports. I've seen agencies of record expand, supporting consulting service, market research, medical support. And I think this is being driven probably by a lot of factors. I think procurement people in organizations are looking to bring value and to lower overall costs. So they're looking for efficiencies. I think there's some perceptions probably of broad capabilities. There may be needs for very specialized expertise. Some of these do have access to data, analytics, administrative support, things like that. We've seen a fair amount of people leave pharma, and some of those have gone their own consulting routes. Some of those have gone into these companies. So I think that is kind of driving a bit of this. And certainly these organizations are looking to drive revenue. And so I think about it. I think, again, kind of back to the fraction model, the partner model, I think the opportunity to leverage capabilities and continue to evolve that, our opportunity to reinforce experience and the specific expertise to meet needs. And then I think with some budget transparency and clarity, a lot of that kind of gets hidden in some of the bigger consulting groups. So again, a challenge, but I think an opportunity as well. And I'm just going to comment because I don't want to take really too much more time on this. These are all topics in and of themselves. But there's some added financial implications that are driving some things in the US. The Medicaid bucket that I talked about has historically, any rebates from a manufacturer back to Medicaid has been capped at 100% of your average manufacturer price. So, in theory, you might not make money in Medicaid, but you typically wouldn't lose money in Medicaid. And that is changing now because they have uncapped the Medicaid rebate. So if you're offering a best price to someone, they get they get a statutory rebate. If you've taken price increases that have been beyond inflation, if you've done something on the generic side, you could very easily find yourself underwater in Medicaid. So that is a change. I think companies are going to do a lot of portfolio work, thinking about their strategy in Medicaid and how they prevent revenue leakage. We'll certainly see changes in gross to net. So it's going to require people, as I mentioned earlier, to rethink even generic strategies as well. The last two may be a bit unique to the US. I think the coupons are. I'm not sure how patient assistance programs work directly in Europe, for example, but the patient assistance programs are programs that the manufacturer has offered to offset costs if they financially qualify. Okay, so companies will set a limit typically tied to the federal poverty level. So I think this is, there are payers now that are trying to drive their population to the manufacturer patient assistance program. So it takes burden off the payer and say, hey, if pharma's going to give this money for patient assistance, if they qualify, I want to get them in the patient assistance program. So I think pharmaceutical companies are reassessing right now their limits on this. The good news is by capping the Medicare population at $2,000 may take a little pressure off some of these programs. The last one I'll mention is the coupon programs. That has become a pretty standard process in the US to offset costs. It allows manufacturers to offset patient out-of-pocket costs. Historically, those costs paid by the manufacturer were applied to getting the patient through the Part D out-of-pocket levels that we talked about. That's been changed now. So any of the manufacturer contributions, it has to be a true patient out-of-pocket cost to get that patient through and into the catastrophic. So again, I think companies are looking at these and making a lot of decisions. So they're topics in and of themselves. I won't belabor it, but I will just close with saying, as I think about the US market and I think about some of the changes and I think about fraction and I think about our opportunity and our consulting roles, I think anything we can do to expand our experience and knowledge in the biologics space, I think that is something that is certainly worth some attention on. I think we'll see more early commercialization and early planning from that phase 2 to phase 3 transition and that expertise. I think the ability to leverage partners and capabilities and the knowledge of this network and how we can offer it to clients. I think beyond just project support, I think augmentation support, I think some of the most fun I've had is being in an augmentation role where you almost are back sitting in a marketing seat from my perspective, and you're working very close and you're involved in decisions and you're involved in the planning. And I honestly like that aspect of the consulting role very much. I think looking for companies who are resource constrained is certainly an opportunity. I think anything anyone can do to help contribute to generate effectiveness data. And I think just in the US, a bit of a working knowledge of some of these changes, I think just brings helpful context. And with that, I think at the end of the day, I'm optimistic that while we are certainly seeing changes that will challenge manufacturers and even us as consultants, I do think experienced, capable, good consultant, that need will remain. And I think that's a real opportunity for us. So with that, I think that's kind of my concluding thought. Nigel, we can open it up for any questions that anyone might have.
Yeah, so thank you, Tom. So big applause from myself and the group, I'm sure. So let's open up for a few questions. Well, I just do note we've got some comments in the chat box, Tom. I don't know if you can see those as well, but Paul, it's one or two comments you've made. I don't know if you want to speak to those or.
Oh, let me just bring them up. Yeah, they were just as you were going through, Tom. So what we always have this dilemma with American patients that anything where there's a sort of social change to healthcare is somewhat seen as the devil, because if you ever talk to Americans about the national health system, there's a sort of visceral reaction that the state is controlling health. Seeing the $2,000 cap sounds to me like bloody good news for the American American public. Is it being held as such, or is it yet again a dichotomy between Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. I think the $2,000 patient cap is great for patients, right? And I'm going to be in Medicare some days. I'm thrilled with it. So I think it's very good. I would say, the U.S. Pharma market. I do think. I think preference has certainly been, and I'll even take it a step forward to the administrations. We can even talk about that for a minute. I mean, you think about the current administration and the previous administration with Donald Trump. I think they shared commonalities and that they wanted to lower prescription drug costs. And clearly that's where Donald Trump was going. That's certainly where Joe Biden and his administration. I think how they get there is different. I think this current administration is very much of a bigger government, higher regulation to get there. I do not think that was the mindset of the Trump administration, or if there's a different administration next go around. So it'll be interesting to see how these things changes. But I would certainly say I think Medicare is viewed favorably. I think the market perceives drug costs to be high. I think the changes to get a patient to $2,000 out of pocket is the right thing to do. I would also just conclude by saying I think the government has fired a shot across the bow. I think there is a strong capitalistic environment here that I think would not like to go to a single source payer system. And I think the government is kind of saying, get your house in order. If you do, and you manage costs, then we can find some boundaries that we're going to live here. If you don't, then we'll fix it for you. So that's, I guess, kind of the way I would articulate that. Kind of a long-winded answer, but.
Lisa, I can see you've got your hand up, so you want to follow on.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a tag on to Paul's question, because I'm with you, Tom, and I really appreciated the terrific overview you provided. For years now, we've been talking about streamlining the distribution process. Do you think that by putting pressure on pricing, we'll see things like pharmacy benefit managers disappear and the kind of the distribution system improve in that regard?
Yeah, no, good question. So this is pure speculation. So,
yes, understood.
I think I could see a change to the PBM network over time if this change took place, or if these changes continue to take place. And the government steps in and says, look, we're going to control pricing and we're going to manage pricing. You know, the role of PBMs has always been a little coming from the brand chair, one that I struggled with a lot. It's the payers that have really wanted to take the administrative burden off themselves. And so they contracted out with a pharmacy benefit manager, and those PBMs were extracting rebates, and yet we were paying the health plan for access to the drugs. So I could see some challenge to the PBMs. I mean, just purely speculatively in that light. I don't know. I'd be interested if others have other thoughts, but I take your question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Follow-on question to that, Tom, which is my next one, which is clearly all of this is beating the death out of 8%. We know that the majority of cost is going to be from the provision of medicine, so that's the actual professional care. So surely is there not also going to be an attack on rates of care? So because I know that physicians, there's a huge deviation in cost of a procedural cost in the US. Is that somewhere else the government's going to go after?
Yeah, I haven't tackled that one in terms of thinking. So certainly I made the comment, whether you believe it's perceived or real, the public perception is drugs in the US cost too much. But they make up only 9% of the total healthcare expenditures. So I do think there's great opportunities to address some of these other segments. I think you're going to begin to see physician administration be affected here. So I've commented on that, but that's tied to kind of the drug distribution. But nothing is more frustrating to me. I went in for a knee replacement a few years ago. I get the bill from the orthopedic surgeon and it's $35,000. And oh, guess what? My insurance they paid $3,000 to him and we're done.
Yeah.
I mean, just that discrepancy. And this is the challenge I think this industry has publicly and perceptually, that historically there has been no alignment of who's paying for the drug, right? So you've got a patient, we've got a health plan, we've got a manufacturer, we've got a PBM, we've got the government. There's no direct contractual relationship there. If there was a real contractual relationship between the patient and the provider or the manufacturer in some way, I think you'd see a different economic model. I mean, just give the patient $5,000 to manage their costs in a month. If they don't use it, they keep it. If they do use it, well, and then the government covers everything else catastrophically, right? I mean, I'm just thinking wild thought ideas here. But yes, other aspects need to be addressed. I didn't really tackle that one here, but they clearly need to be addressed.
Yeah.
I guess then, Tom, you come back and look at Obamacare, and why that failed is this discrepancy between state and federal.
Yeah.
So in a utopian world, unless the states give up their power to go federal with it all, it's going to be a tough call, isn't it, really?
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up Obamacare, and for someone who left corporate health insurance and went out to private health insurance, it has been the single most enlightening experience for me in terms of my perspective on health coverage. For having to go into Obamacare and the healthcare marketplace to get it, some of that's income driven, but it's been a challenge. And I don't understand why a country like the US can't really get this figured out. And it leads me more to some of the models you have overseas. I just don't want to throw both feet over there. I'd like to get some toes over there and how we manage this and put some processes in place that do control these costs. But it's it's interesting. But I do think these steps signal government's interest to get involved.
It's interesting. I mean, I was talking to some old colleagues at United a couple of months ago on a client topic, and I was amazed to hear that 30% of the insured population now have access to a rare or orphan disease. And
have access to what? I missed that.
Well, have a rare or orphan disease.
Oh, yeah.
And if you think about how the industry is going down that route to kind of maximize their profit, high price, you wonder how long that's going to be sustainable as well before that becomes in focus.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. I think the short-term path for pharma is they're looking at those markets because they can control price. Some of them are large markets. Orphan markets brings additional exclusivity to products in the US. The government will grant exclusivity for orphan drugs. But you're right. I mean, I certainly sat in product meetings looking for every way we could to designate a drug as an orphan product, how we define the segment that would make it orphan. And downstream, that could very well be another area that the government gets involved in. Again, back to this shot across the bow. Let's start getting some things in order, or not, we're going to fix this and some others.
So, Paul, maybe to finish up on your specialist subject of psychedelics, we had a question there.
Yeah, well, it's psychedelics and it's microbiome, and it's a lot of these sort of completely new innovation areas. They're coming in, and they're coming in to address mass disease areas. So if you think of depression in America, 71 million Americans suffer from depression. So if you're going to bring a novel therapy in, what the hell are they going to do with these you know, with a drug that potentially, if they're coming in for classic model, is going to come in at thousands of dollars, where it's up against drugs that are costing single dollars at the moment, if we think of antidepressants. So, I mean, is that back to your, I've got to really think the strategy out before they launch?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you bring up psychedelics. I'm not well versed in them. I touched someone who was dealing with psychedelics. I must admit, not sure how the payer landscape's going to look at them. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, just calling out psychedelics as an example. My guess is if the data that can be generated substantiates them, and there's all the care and support services that go with them and all those kinds of things, you know, I'm kind of intrigued by the psychedelics. So we'll be interested, I guess, kind of see where that goes.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, can I ask you one last question?
Sure.
I also saw in the Inflation Reduction Act, HTA raising its head again with ISA and everything else. I mean, how do you think that's going to go forward, and is it going to survive the next election?
I'm sorry, can you run that question by me one more time?
Yeah, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was also some provision around health technology assessment. You know, rewarming the Obama initiative. Do you think that's going to have legs this time, or is it not going to survive the next election?
Well, I guess the honest answer is depends on who wins the next election. I'm not sure. I think the premise behind Obamacare is good. I think its execution left some challenges. So I think there'll be support for anything that is trying to bring efficiencies and cost reduction to the healthcare system. How it gets done, there will be differences of opinions. I'm not answering your question, but I think some variations will last probably.
Okay.
Just conscious of time, everybody. But if there's any burning last thoughts or questions, I'm sure we can take those. If not, then, so thank you, Tom. Sincerely, I know a huge amount of effort and thought has got into today's discussion. Truly appreciate that from Fraction and the partner network and beyond. I'm sure, you know, I think it's very clear, of course, that there are winds of change. I guess that's always been a constant in our industry, of course, many others, no doubt. But I think comes with that is lots of pressure in the system and change. And, you know, maybe as you've described, Fraction has huge opportunity around that still. You know, we've greater pressures around resourcing, layoffs, etc. Companies, both large and small, looking for new types of resourcing model. Then, you know, that's Fraction's opportunity. And you again demonstrate the huge wealth of experience and expertise we have in our network, Tom, and across the board. So on that note, thank you once again, Tom. Thanks everybody for a wonderful discussion. And look out for the next webinar coming to you very soon, no doubt.